Are you expecting a little one and looking for childcare options available here in Australia? If you are, please continue watching. Hi everyone, I'm Dani. Thank you for clicking on my video. Today I'll be presenting to you a number of childcare options that are available here in Australia. Some of these options I've tried and tested myself, and I'm here to share my personal experience with you so that hopefully it will make your decision making a bit easier. Today I'll be talking to you about 5 childcare options. The first one is family. The second one is long daycare. The third one is family daycare. The fourth one is using a babysitter or a nanny, and the fifth one is an au pair. I will go through in some detail in regards to long daycare because that is the service I use the most, and I'll also cover some advantages and disadvantages of each option. Option number 1 is asking family to assist you with childcare. This is often a very popular option for many reasons. First of all, it's convenient. You would probably trust this person very much, and you know that no deliberate harm to the child will occur. The other thing is also that they would probably be free or hopefully not cost very much if they decide to ask for an allowance. There's probably no boundaries as to what you can ask them to do. You could ask them to take them to the doctors, and say, for example, my mother was assisting me in the initial phase when Bub was just born. She was assisting me look after Bub overnight. Also, it promotes family bonding. So in terms of the disadvantages of this option, your in-laws or your parents may have very different parenting styles to yourself. You may want your child brought up or treated in a very specific way. For example, a grandparent might be very willing to pick up your baby and carry them around the house all day because they're enjoying the cuddle time. However, for some parents, they may choose to try and settle a crying baby in the cot so that the baby learns how to calm down while still remaining in the cot. And if it comes to a time when you need to parent the baby by yourself, it makes it a lot more convenient if the baby could be taught how to be settled in a cot. And in this situation, if the grandparent of the child is constantly picking them up, you might be finding it difficult to implement something like this. Sometimes when there are disagreements in the approach of how to manage the child, it of course can cause tension. So is that something that you're willing to risk? Further awkward situations can arise. You decide that you would like to look at other options of childcare. It then can be quite an awkward conversation with the grandparent to say, yes, I don't really want you looking after my child anymore. And in a very similar way, if the grandparent realizes how much work it is to be looking after your child, they in reverse may then tell you that they can't look after your child. And hopefully in this situation, if that is the case, the grandparent would have at least had the courtesy of giving you some warning to make sure that you can find alternate childcare. If the grandparent doesn't do that, you can be stuck in a very tricky situation. The other disadvantage is, what is the backup plan if the grandparent then falls sick and needs to take a certain amount of time away from looking after your child? And in this situation, I'm specifically referring to the fact that yourself and your partner have gone back to work full time. So it means that if the grandparent is unable to look after your child, it means that you have to take time off work yourself. So the next childcare option that I'll be talking about is long daycare. So long daycare is a very common option that is used in Australia. Long daycare is convenient for several reasons. Your child gets dropped off at the facility in the morning and you don't have to worry about them all day. Obviously, if they fall sick, childcare will be ringing you to ask you to pick them up. In the first year of your child's life in childcare, they often fall sick really often because there's so many other children there. One of the first things that babies learn to do is to put things in their mouth. So you have kids playing with toys and they're putting them straight in their mouth. So the risk of them falling sick is high, and you have to be prepared to take a lot of time off in the first year that your child is in childcare. Well, the good thing is it does help their immunity. Childcare can also provide an excellent environment for education and stimulation for your child. It's quite common to observe that children who go to childcare develop language skills much earlier. So I'm going to cut away from this clip now to take you to a website that I think is extremely useful in helping parents make up their minds about various childcare. So I am on the homepage of startingblocks.gov.au. It is an Australian-based government website. I'm just going to scroll across the top bar here, and as you can see, there's a number of resources that are listed at the top that's going to be generally helpful. The two sections that I think are going to be most relevant to a new parent is here under Find Childcare and at Childcare and Tips for Parents. So here I'm going to roll my cursor over at childcare and go to choosing a service. They have listed here a number of different childcares that are regulated under the National Quality Framework. So that's essentially guidelines that childcares in Australia are supposed to adhere to or work towards. Here there's also listed a number of childcare options that are not regulated under the NQF. So what is the NQF? The NQF indicates that there are 7 quality areas that childcares are supposed to adhere to. So as you can see, there's educational program and practice, children's health and safety, and so on and so forth. Childcares are assessed according to these standards. For each quality area, they are given a rating of significant improvement required, working towards national quality standards, and so on. So after that, what you can do, now that you understand what the quality areas are, you can head to Find Childcare and enter your postcode of where you want the childcare to be. Here I've just randomly entered Adelaide because that's the city I live in, and you can see a number of childcare or schools have turned up. So this is a primary school. I'm going to skip that one. Here we've got Chancery Lane Montessori Preschool. It is long daycare, preschool and kindergarten. As you can see, in terms of all the quality areas, they exceed the national quality standard. So that's really good. If you're looking down a list and you find that there is one that is missing the mark on multiple quality areas, perhaps you might consider scratching them from your list. That's a really quick way of screening which childcares you would even consider or not. So once you've decided on a list of childcares that you're comfortable sending your child to, organize a visit. And what you will need is a list of questions, which is here under Tips for Parents. They've conveniently listed a number of questions. I'm going to pick a question from this list. And what is the ratio of staff to children? This is technically a no-brainer because there is a ratio that the childcare needs to adhere to. And that's also on this website. This page under Tips for Parents, that's educated to child ratios and what to expect. There's a whole lot of text here, but right down the bottom, focusing on new parents for children from birth to 24 months, the ratio should be 1 staff member to every 4 children. So this makes it, again, really handy. So if you've asked the childcare, what's your ratio, and it's non-compliant with this, then perhaps you might want to scratch that. I'm also going to leave you this link, which is 17 tips on what to look for when choosing a childcare center. All right, I'm going to take you back. So the next thing that I want to talk about is questions that I did ask when I was looking for a childcare. So as you saw before in that clip, there was a list of suggested questions that you could ask. A few additional things that I asked about was, how do they manage allergies? I also asked what's their policy around application of sunscreen. I also asked them whether the children are exposed to any screen time. So according to the guidelines of the WHO, children should not have any screen time under the age of 5. I know that sounds really hard, and I'm not saying that I'm compliant with that. If a child can watch TV, what's the point of them going to childcare? It's also good to ask about their sleep arrangements and whether the child gets their own cot. How often are the bed sheets laundered? It's sort of an indication for the hygiene practices of the facility. With every childcare, the children should be separated according to age groups. So in the youngest room, they often tend to be from the age of 8 weeks to the age of 18 months. I think it's good to clarify that the childcare is compliant. The reason I say that is because if you're going to start your child at a very young age in childcare, for example, at 6 months or something like that, because you're choosing to go back to work, At the age of 6 months, the child may not be particularly mobile yet, which means that if there is an older child, say they might be 12 months or 18 months, that older child is going to be much more mobile. And often children at that age are very curious about little babies, and they might go over and inadvertently, I don't know, sit on them or something like that. And specifically, it did happen to my daughter. She was quite young and she wasn't particularly mobile yet, and a bigger crawling child got to her. In the process of trying to play with her, accidentally scratched her forehead. Obviously, it was non-malicious, but that's something that could happen, and it's something that you got to be prepared for. I think it's also important to ask about the menu so that you have an idea of what your child's being fed. The facility that I use have their menu put up on the wall so that you can have a look at it. The other thing is to ask about the syllabus that the childcare might be using. So it's quite common for childcares to be using the ELF system. There's other more specific programs such as Montessori programs, and it's worth looking up to see what sort of education philosophy they have. I also ask about staff turnover. What I like to hear is that the staff who've worked there have been there for 10 to 15 or 20 years. And it's usually an indication that the childcare is running really well and they're able to retain their staff. It also means that your child is not going to be exposed to multiple different people because the turnover of the staff of that facility is so high. I would also ask about sick leave. The facility is supposed to maintain a certain number of staff to children ratio. I'd be interested to know in how the childcare organizes a reliever. The other thing you should do is to also organize a visit to the center. The principal or a senior educator should be more than willing to accommodate a request like that. Essentially, go there, have a look at what the children look like. Do they look happy? Do they look fed? And I think it also helps to have a look at how the children interact with the educators. It's often very reassuring to watch children go up and hug educators randomly, or to watch them interact with the educators really well. The other thing to also observe is how the educators interact with each other. If I'm concerned that there's tension amongst team members, I probably wouldn't be sending my child there. When you go and look at these childcare centers and you go and ask your list of questions, you will probably find that the answers are all going to be relatively standard. There are certain standards that childcare centers have to adhere to, and if their answers seem to deviate from standard, then probably that's a childcare and you should cross off your list. Now, a couple of things I want to point out about choosing the location of the daycare center that you will pick. You can either select the option that's close to home or the option that's close to work. My suggestion is to pick a long daycare center that is close to the primary caregiver on weekdays. And that's very specific. So the reason I'm recommending that is because childcare only operates on weekdays. So the child only needs to be dropped off and picked up on weekdays. I say primary caregiver on weekdays because it depends on who's looking after the child from Monday to Friday. So if it's the grandparents that are primarily looking after the child from Monday to Friday, it is important for the childcare to be close to where they live. In my opinion, the reason not to select a childcare that's close to your workplace is because the burden of drop off and pick up then falls onto one parent. Say, for example, if I picked a childcare that's close to my work, I am then responsible for drop off and pick up. And also, if the child is sick, I will be the parent who has to go and pick up the child. And it becomes rather inconvenient if, say, I have a late meeting. I have to call my partner to say, can you please go and get the baby? If he works 30 minutes away from where I work, he has to drive all that way to go and pick up the child. If the childcare center is close to home, it means that mom and dad can take turns picking the child up and dropping them off. And same thing if it's the grandparents that are the primary carer. Selecting a childcare that's close to home will also be handy if the parents change their job or the workplace changes location. Selecting a childcare that's close to work is not all bad. It does mean that you have very easy access to your child if you want. Some parents choose to go and visit their child during lunchtime, and if that's something that you'd like to practice, maybe that's an option that will suit you. It is also very reassuring to have your child close to where you work, because if something was to happen, you'd be able to get to them very quickly. One clear example that I can think of was during bushfire season when there were bushfires around, and I was concerned that the fire would spread really quickly and I wouldn't be able to get to her in time. The other thing about location to consider is is the childcare located on a main road that's very difficult to turn in and out of? I would suggest, as part of your research, perhaps during peak hour, drive to the childcare that you are considering and see if you can exit the childcare. It seems like a small thing, but when you're in a hurry, especially when you've dropped off your child and you've stayed with them for a little bit because they've been crying and you've not been able to let them go, yeah, you want to be able to exit and, you know, start heading to work really quickly. The last thing I would say is to make sure that you have your child's name down on enough childcare centres. I live in Adelaide, which is not the busiest city, and I put my child's name on 4 childcare centres. I eventually got a phone call from 2 centres, one of which was my top pick, so I was very glad about that. If you are living in a city that's extremely busy like Melbourne or Sydney, you might consider putting your child's name down on more centers, maybe 6 or something like that. So the other thing to be aware of long daycare and some of the other childcare options like family daycare, you might be eligible for a Centrelink subsidy. It is means tested. If you are a high income earner and you are certain that you probably won't be eligible for any Centrelink benefits, have a think about that. The thing is, your maternity leave will affect your income. When someone is on maternity leave in Australia, you get 3 months of full pay, and whatever leave you take after that is unpaid leave. Just for ease of explaining the situation, say for example, your child is born on the first day of a financial year, so the 1st of July 2019. And you decide to take maternity leave from the 1st of July 2019. If you decide to take 6 months of annual leave, it will mean that you will return to work on the 1st of January 2020. And once you go back to work, you may not necessarily go back full time. You may only start by going back to work 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 1 day a week, or whatever it is. This means that your overall income for that financial year from July 2019 to June 2020 may not be particularly high, and it may just bring you to below the threshold, and you may be eligible for a childcare subsidy, especially in the first financial year that your child is born. So I would certainly suggest that you look into it. I will leave a link in the description box below in order for you to have a look at. It is very dry reading, so perhaps one night if you're struggling to fall asleep, you could have a look at this link. You technically can't apply for this subsidy until your child is born, so it's not anything that you can action right now. The childcare centre that you eventually go to as well should be able to assist you. So next childcare is family daycare. This is when the childcare is run from an educator's home. So it's usually one educator in their own home looking after a small group of children, say 4 or 5 children. This allows the child to learn in a very small group. One of the big advantages of this, I think, is the fact that your child is not exposed to so many children, and I understand that the rate of infections are lower in family daycare. For this option, you would also be eligible for the Centrelink childcare subsidy. Personally, when I looked into this option, I decided to go against this because I guess in my mind, I feel more reassured by the fact that there's some sort of backup staff for everyone. As an example, I wondered how this educator would go and use the bathroom if they were the only adult with the child. As part of my research, I also asked, what would happen if that educator then falls sick? The response I got was, that's not usually a problem. We don't usually fall sick because we only look after a very small number of children. But if that was to happen, we would be ringing a colleague to try and distribute the children amongst our colleagues. And I guess I wasn't particularly comfortable with that. The next option is to use a nanny or a babysitter. This option can be convenient in many ways. If you have a nanny that's home with you, it means that the child is always with you. They would probably also get more one-to-one attention. There's also a lot of flexibility in using a nanny. I've heard of people who can financially afford it, bring their nannies along on holidays to assist with looking after their little kids. Nannies are also paid on an hourly basis, so that can get quite expensive if you're using them for the whole day. But having said that, if you're finding that it's too expensive, you can always reduce the number of hours that they work as well. You also don't have to deal with the stress of drop-off and pick-up. Something I forgot to mention about childcare is that there are childcare facilities that do charge exorbitant fees if you're late to pick up your child. I think that's quite standard. My childcare charges $5 every minute that you're late to pick up your child. So just something to be aware of. So yeah, don't be late to pick up your child from childcare. The other disadvantage of using a full-time nanny is that your child or your children may not get as much opportunity to socialize with other children. If you decide to go down the option of using a nanny, whether part-time or full-time, I suggest making sure that you have at least 2 or 3 rotating nannies. Nannies have their own lives as well, so sometimes someone could be sick, someone could go on a holiday, which means that they're unable to commit to then coming to do your job. So the last option that I'm going to talk about is engaging an au pair. So an au pair is a live-in nanny, but they don't have the same qualifications as a childcare educator. They usually travel from overseas and they come and live in your house. There are a number of advantages that they can be very affordable and they can look after multiple children. They also live in, so there's the convenience of accessing their assistance when you need them. You can't ask them to clean your whole house, but you can ask them to do domestic duties that are related to the child. So they can do a little bit of, simple meal prep. They can do laundry, they can change the cot sheets. And if you engage an au pair full time, it means that you don't have to worry about drop off and pick up of childcare. I do know of people who might have had an older child in early learning and their younger child at home. The au pair would drop off the elder child and remain home with the younger child. Clearly, when your child is at home as well, they catch less infections than going to long daycare. So there are a number of disadvantages. They are often someone who is younger and they may not have such wide life experiences and they may not be as mature. Of course, this is not universal. There are some au pairs are extremely mature at a young age, and there are some au pairs who are older who are not as mature. And as I said before, they don't have formal qualifications of childcare, so they don't necessarily have an education program or a structure to follow to promote a child's development. So in general, I do think that being an au pair is probably more suitable for someone with older children, say age 3 and onwards, when they are very interactive and active and they love going out to the parks and things as such. Not so much for very young babies, where a lot of what they do is napping. You might find an au pair who's willing to engage in mostly domestic duties, because if the child is very young and you're mum, the child would probably be mostly with you. With this, I thought I would share my experience of engaging au pairs. So the reason we engaged in au pair was really because my daughter, when she was young, was quite unsettled and needed a lot of time from us. So we wanted a spare pair of hands at home to assist with managing. People say that it takes a whole village to raise a child. And yes, I totally agree with that. Our first au pair's contract was for about 6 months. It was a learning process for us just as much as it was for her. I also asked advice from one of my friends who've had au pairs for a number of years, and she gave me some guidelines as to how to effectively communicate with your au pair, because technically they are really young. They are like 17 or 18, so their sense of responsibility may not be up to your standards, I guess, especially when it comes to looking after a really small child. So the first au pair, we had it for 6 months. It was a learning experience for us. And then we engaged our second au pair. We had a 1-year contract with her. She didn't have any particular plans after that, probably other than traveling, whereas our first one knew that she wanted to come and work with us for 6 months and subsequently go home to start university, whereas our second one didn't have as much direction. 3 months into her contract, she ran away. Yes, she ran away. How did it happen? It was a day that Bob was at childcare. So I picked the baby up from childcare and I came home to an empty house and a note. She listed the reasons as to why she left. She felt that her salary wasn't enough to pay for some of her intended holidays. She did not like that she had a curfew. She's meant to be home by 10 p.m. That night if she's working the next morning. At that time, because I allocated the domestic tasks to the au pair so that I could spend time with the baby, and I think this au pair expected the job to be more about minding the child rather than doing the domestic tasks. At this point, you might be wondering, maybe, myself and my partner were at fault. We spoke to the au pair agency to explain what had happened. Obviously, we had to report that she's gone. And the agency fed back to us that she had checked in with the agency a fortnight prior to leaving. She queried about her pay and her tasks and so on and so forth. The agent fed back to our au pair that her job was very easy compared to a lot of the other au pairs, in the sense that our au pair only needed to look after one child, and She would only ever do it in our presence. She was never left alone with our little one. Sure, there were domestic duties, but they weren't beyond what was expected. And having said that, all of what we asked her to do was listed in a contract that she read and signed before she got on a plane to come to us. So I thought I'd just put that out there so that I don't get judged. So that's all that I have today. If you've got any questions, please put them in the description box below. In the process of editing, I realized that I forgot to film an outro. I will be putting all the links that I talked about in the description box below. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and if you liked it, please click on the thumbs up button below, as it would really help my YouTube algorithm. And if you like more videos like these, please feel free to subscribe and click on the bell button so that you get notified every time I upload a video. My videos will be about other practical tips for parents that hopefully will be helpful to you, that I found helpful to myself. I also love luxury, as the name of my channel suggests. Some of my content will also contain some luxury handbags. So I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye.